Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Well, today on the show, we are going to be having on Barry Shaw. He really knows how to put the facts on the table, and when you leave this show today, you're going to have a lot of facts in your pocket. So we're going to be talking about material on the Democratic convention that just took place in the United States, the direction that the Democratic Party is taking in America. And the reason that we're concentrating on this is because if the Democratic Party wins in the elections come this November, it is going to have a direct effect on Israel. We know that the Obama administration, where Biden served for 8 years as vice president, was always putting pressure on Israel to concede and always taking more of a pro-Arab anti-Israel stance, even though they would dress it up as being very, as we say in Israel, in Hebrew, parev, very mediocre, middle ground. But that's not true. And any chance that Israel would get a green light from the United States government to be able to put in sovereignty into parts of Judea and Samaria, what the prime minister here in Israel wanted to do, would essentially be gone. Not that Israel needs a green light from the United States. However, Israel would prefer, the government here would prefer to have that from not just the United States, but the world. It would be wonderful if the world said, yes, it's your land, go and take it. In any case, we're going to be discussing all of that and the UAE-Israel peace deal that our guest says is being largely ignored by the media. And some good news. Thank goodness, as of Sunday night in Israel, so far, it looks like we will not be going to new elections on this side of the pond in November, as many of us were wondering about. Prime Minister Netanyahu, in fact, gave a press conference Sunday night touting how a peace deal with the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, would bring in an infusion of money and business into Israel, repairing a lot of the unemployment plaguing the country since the coronavirus. Anyway, don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. And remember, it's a call-in show. Feel free to call in.
Always challenging the status quo. Hello, I'm Rod Bryant on Beyond the Matrix here at IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. I want to encourage you to listen each week, every Wednesday at the same time, for an amazing show that will challenge you, inform you, and inspire. News, views, and wisdom for the nations here on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. Don't forget, Beyond the Matrix every week, Wednesday, here on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com.
Right, so coronavirus or no, Israel is looking up. That, according to the prime minister at the press conference that he gave on Sunday night. He was saying how this new peace deal between Israel and the UAE is going to be prosperous and even help the damage that Corona did here in the country with the money from the UAE and their businesses and the infusion that's going to be taking place in the economy, bringing back jobs, working together, and other Arab countries to follow. That's what they're saying. There are going to be more Arab countries following suit in having looking for peace with Israel, that this is going to be a wonderful thing. And yet the press, our guest said, is not giving it, the media is not giving it the attention that it deserves. Our guest is Barry Shaw. He is the International Public Diplomacy Director at the Institute for Strategic Studies. His books include Fighting Hamas, BDS, and Anti-Semitism, Anti-Semitism, BDS for Idiots, and 1917 From Palestine to Israel. They're all available on Amazon or at the Stamatsky bookstores. And you can visit his website at strategic-israel.org. Welcome to the show, Barry Shaw.
Hello, Tamar. Again, thank you for having me.
It's good to have you on. All right. So the UAE, there's supposed to be peace between our two countries, and the Prime Minister is very excited about it. In fact, I don't think he wants to have to go to new elections due to some of this because things are rolling in the right direction for him. Where do you want to take us on this?
All right. Well, some latest news is the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is landing in Israel this morning. He'll be having meetings with Bibi before heading off to Bahrain and to Sudan. And he's also, of course, visiting the UAE. But since Sudan overthrew the genocidal dictator last year, they're looking to the West for salvation. And their way to Washington really runs through Israel. And Mike Pompeo, by the way, while he's here, will address the Republican convention this week from Jerusalem. It's a smart move to remind American voters that it was Trump that recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and it was Trump that moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, and that not one Democrat came to Israel for the opening of the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem. Now, I'd like to talk to you later on about aspects of the U.S. election. But I want to talk about a couple of issues, aspects of the Israel and United Arab Emirates peace deal that are significant. The Palestinians in both factions, PA and Hamas, naturally, of course, condemn the peace agreement with Israel, as they do all the time, but as did Iran and Turkey. But I want to emphasize what the Palestinian reaction means. Everyone from Mahmoud Abbas, Jibril Rajoub, Hanan Ashrawi, Hamas rejected the deal, okay. But the PA, the Palestinian Authority Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, issued a fatwa banning Emirati Muslims from coming to Israel, praying at the Al-Aqsa Mosque if they arrived in Israel via Ben Gurion Airport. And he said that by doing that, they betrayed not only the Palestinians, but Muhammad himself. He said, and to quote him, what happened is treason, he said. This is treachery, not just against the Palestinian people. This is a denial of the heritage of Muhammad. And then he said, our Jerusalem and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, goods that to be sold in the market of political prostitution, this is treachery. And in Palestinian streets, they were organizing spontaneous brackets demonstrations in which they burnt the Emirati flag. Now, the Emiratis are a proud people, and the royal households of Abu Dhabi and Dubai don't like being called prostitutes and traitors. And basically, the Palestinians badly misjudged their overreaction. And I've been watching how Emiratis began to tweet and express their anger. And there was one Emirati academic, Dr. Wasim Youssef, who tweeted, it's stupid to bear my country's flag. They want me to salute them. And then he went on to say, when I see my flag being burnt by some Palestinians because of a peace treaty with Israel, I apologize to every Israeli if I ever offended him in the past.
Right.
And another Emirati tweeted, imagine that just in 20 years, both Saudi Arabia and the UAE gave the Palestinians no less than $20 billion. And he went on and said this, I expect if we had spent that much money on Israel, his people would have converted to Islam.
Right.
And what he meant by that, Tamar, was that Israel would have shown gratitude, something the Palestinians never do. But like beggars, they always demand more. So many other Arabs are now raising the issue of Palestinian corruption, some pointing to the personal fortunes of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh, Khaled Mashal, and also Mahmoud Abbas, that running into billions of dollars. And in return for being called traitors and prostitutes, the citizens of the modern moderate Arab countries are calling Palestinians out for their ingratitude and hypocrisies. And we're seeing messages in the Arab newspapers and social media saying, we're fed up with you. Your people are ungrateful, hypocritical, and vindictive. And you have the arrogance to burn on flag and hurl insults at us. And one person said, the happiness of the Israeli people with the peace agreement shocked me. I was not expecting it. These people really want peace. And actually, another aspect of this, Tamar, is as we've seen here from Israel, as we see on our TV screens, we see regular Emiratis actually celebrating. We never saw that with the Egyptians on the street when Egypt made peace with Israel, or the Jordanians when King Hussein made peace with Israel. But we're seeing it in certain countries of the moderate Arab world, which is a surprise to us as well.
You know, it's funny because I already have my cousin's son is already sending videos on WhatsApp of him being in Dubai wearing the white long flowing robe and the white headdress, and he's he's in one of their spectacular hotels over there, just beautiful. Yes, so I'm curious where this is all going to lead. I just, there's a saying in Hebrew, kabdehu v'chashdehu, respect him but suspect him. And I welcome peace with everybody. However, I think that we need to not delude ourselves either and just understand that a lot of this is motivated by the fear of Iran and these Arab countries, especially in the Gulf region, who could easily be swallowed by Iran, are looking to, put their hands in with their saviors. And if Iran were not to be a threat anymore, how much can we trust them? However, being optimistic and cautiously optimistic, I'm enjoying some of these things that I'm seeing, and I'm hoping.
Well, it's like you said. I think we Israelis, we've made this peace and we see we don't get real peace. And I think we're cynical enough to be open-minded about it. Like you said, trust and verify. And I think we'll find there'll be certain benefits. And I think as these nations, and basically the reason Pompeo's here is going to start with the Abu Dhabi and Dubai. We think it's going to spread to Bahrain and to Sudan. I think Saudi Arabia will slow coming in. But however, we can't put our guard down. We have to be careful. And one of the issues, of course, is the dispute over the United States supplying the UAE with the F-35 sophisticated fighter plane. So we're very much aware that we have to still keep our strategic edge.
Yes, absolutely. And at the same time, be optimistic. But, my mother, ever since I was a little girl, she used to tell me with the Arab money, because they were, filthy rich in money with the oil, with the Arab money and the Jewish brains, if they only got together with us, we could change the world like you couldn't imagine. And perhaps we'll start to see a little bit of that for the benefit of the entire world.
Well, yeah, we're starting to see signs of it because, again, the Arab world over there is like an open book for us. Or now it's become an open book. We didn't know it before. We're beginning to see that the Emiratis seem to be an educated and sophisticated society. And this opens up hope that they're an intelligent people and they have a fairly vulnerable country, and I think they need the regional strength of Israel as an ally.
Yeah, all right. And so I want to remind everybody, if you have any comments or questions on this issue, feel free to call in. Our guest is Barry Shaw, and he's talking about the UAE, the possible peace we're going to have with them. Of course, there has been no peace treaty signed with all the details and what it entails. It has not been hammered out yet, so we'll see what happens there. But it looks very, very encouraging. and optimistic, and I will choose at this time to be cautiously optimistic about this. It's a wonderful thing, and I do hope that other countries fall in line. Unfortunately, the UAE is not going to be setting up their embassy in Jerusalem. That's another thing that is not so pleasant to hear. However, again, we'll remain cautiously and I put an emphasis on cautiously optimistic. We're going to be taking a break now, and when we get back, we're going to be talking more about what's happening in the United States with the Democratic Party, and they just finished their big convention that they had there. Coming up now is the Republican convention. I was at the Democratic convention back in 1968, believe it or not. I remember getting tear gassed in Chicago. That's how old I am. Shh, don't tell anybody. All right, we're going to be right back.
Shalom, everybody. Making a difference often takes just one moment and one person at a time. I am Orly Benny Davis, your show host on Israel News Talk Radios from Jerusalem with Love. You'll be hearing people talking about politics, religion, social issues, and making a better tomorrow. Join me, Orly Benny Davis, for God and Country. From Jerusalem with Love.
Wednesdays on Israel News Talk Radio.
Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Did you know this psalm and many others were composed by a Jewish shepherd and musician who later became a king? Would you like to know some of the inner meanings of psalms to help you connect with God and strengthen your soul? An exciting and easy-to-read book is now available which will help you do just that. Software for the Soul, Psalms for Everyone, available on Kindle, Audible, and Amazon.com. Software for the Soul.
Modesty at the beach? It isn't just about body image. It's about feeling good. Modest swimsuits, so we don't get burned by the sun.
So we won't get ogled by strangers.
So we'll feel free to express ourselves without the need to expose ourselves.
Let Marcy Modest help you to cover up what you want, how you want.
Made in Israel.
Visit marcymodest.com. That's MARSEA modest.com.
And get a 10% discount on your first purchase.
All right, we're back here at the Tamar Yonah Show on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. Our guest is Barry Shaw. He is the International Public Diplomacy Director at the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies, and he's here joining us today. We were talking about the peace deal developing between Israel and the United Arab Emirates, and I just want to say this during the before we go on to our next topic, and that during the break, Barry and I were talking, and we were speaking about how countries don't have friends. They only have interests. And you have to be aware of that right now the UAE, these Gulf states, are in a very precarious situation. The UAE is threatened by Qatar. It is threatened by the Shiite Muslims. It's threatened by by Iran. And the moment these threats go away, they're not looking for peace with Israel because they love us. It's just in their interest. So we have to be aware of that. At the same time, again, as I said, be cautiously optimistic. But as we understand about the UAE, that 90% of the people living there are not citizens. They are foreign workers and expatriates. And, every peace that we've had with Arab countries, including Jordan and Egypt, unfortunately, they've been a very cold peace. You don't see a real peace like you would expect with a peace agreement where there's an exchange of tourism, exchange of businesses, a real friendship and exchanges. We don't see that. Israelis go to Egypt and they tour. They go to Jordan and they tour, but you don't see Jordanians and Egyptians touring here in Israel, and it's a sad situation. So we're gonna be keeping our eye on what's going to be happening with the UAE and see if there is this return return of optimism and warmth on the side of the people. Again, governments can make peace, but if the people themselves hate you, that's a different story. All right. So saying that, let's go on now to what has just transpired in the United States. The Democratic convention is finished. The Republican convention is going to be starting now. Barry, where would you like to start?
Well, I've been researching what's been going on in the political scene in America, certainly for the last 8-10 years, something like that. And I'm very, very troubled what's going on. And let me sum it up by this way. Democrats have been busy for 4 years trying to bury their guilt. What I mean by that is they tried 4 years ago to depose Trump from becoming president in every which way, including criminal, as we're finding out through the Barr and Durham investigation. And the venom against Trump is going on. They bring their poison of venom into the flesh of Donald Trump after losing the 2016 election, even despite abusing the system to try and bring him down. And they've not only lost their moral compass, but basically, I would say, also their sanity. And their rage goes way beyond the well-known Trump derangement syndrome. It's sunk into heinous policies and destructive actions built on dangerous ideologies and nonsense. And the direction they're taking America, for me, is totally incomprehensible. So, Tamar, let me give you just 3 examples from last week's Democrat convention that go from the ridiculous to the sleazy to the dangerous. The depth of their lost soul and insanity personified itself in the appearance of a person who described itself as a, listen to this, black Vietnamese, transgender, non-binary, gender transgender, mermaid queen king. This person refused to call him or her, not even it. He or she wants to be referred to as they or them. And if you call they, them, anything else in America, you're guilty of a gender crime. This, Tamar, is considered woke by the progressive crowd that vote Democrat. Now, pursuing this a bit further, the Democrats advocate for biological men to compete in women's sport and to think differently, to prevent them from doing so, even allowing them to do their own category in sport, make you guilty of gender racism. This is the Democrat Party today. Also at the Democrat convention, we witnessed the death of the hypocritical Me Too movement when Bill Clinton chose the day that the Daily Mail published a photograph of him sitting on Jeffrey Epstein's Lolita Express, having his back massaged, but one of Epstein's victims, to speak in glowing terms of a man that his vice president pick has accused of sexually assaulting an intern of being a racist all his political life. And perhaps the most horrific appearance in the convention was a convicted kidnapper, torturer, and murderer, Donna Hilton. She and her gang of prostitutes in 1986 drugged and kidnapped Thomas Vigliaro in Harlem and subjected him to 3 weeks of torture before killing him. She served 26 years in prison and was released in 2012. And yet she appeared at the Democratic convention of one of America's most impactful community leaders. In my opinion, Tamar, this is a metaphor of what is wrong in America under the Democrats. You're considered reform if you vote Democrat. It cleanses your soul of kidnapping, rape, torture, arson, looting, destruction of the streets, murder, and there's nothing worse than Donald Trump. Not kidnapping, not arson, not looting, not destruction, not sexual harassment, not shakedowns of foreign leaders to save your nepotist son, not selling your country to the Chinese, not selling your strongest ally, Israel, to the Iranians, not even murder. But perhaps the biggest lie they're perpetrating is one of systematic racism. There is no systematic racism in America, not in the police, and not in public. against blacks. The figures, the statistics know this lie to be untrue, yet it dominates the conversation in America as it's brought it down from Mount Sinai on 2 tablets by Moses himself. Let me put it this way. There are more white folks killed by blacks than black folk by whites. There are more blacks killed by cops than cops killing blacks, period. However, where there has been systematic hatred and racism in America for decades has been hate crimes against Jews. This is on the rise, and 2020 will prove to be the highest numbers ever recorded. And the majority of hate crimes against Jews have been perpetrated by black men. This isn't racism, this is telling the truth. There is anti-Semitism, even deadly Jew hatred perpetrated by neo-Nazis, or what they call over there white supremacy. That's for sure. There is rising anti-Semitism perpetrated by Muslims, including and particularly Muslims in positions of power and government within the Democratic Party. But overwhelmingly, blacks are the ones who carry out most of the hate crimes against Jews in America. Black hate crimes against Jews is systematic, but nobody dare speak about it. It's time American Jews to adorn the streets of Washington and New York with big blue letters saying Jewish lives matter. So I'm appalled when I see American Jews take a knee to Black Lives Matter movement. They have an attitude of just vote Democrat and admit your white guilt and you won't be a racist anymore. So let's cut through this Black Lives Matter BS. It doesn't make you a racist to tell the truth. It makes you an honest person. So to those young Jews who consider themselves so superior to the rest of us because you're so woke, we're not letting them say it. You're not progressive at all. You're regressive and a danger to yourself, and you're a danger to the rest of us. I say you've really lost soul. You've lost your spine, and you've lost your moral compass, and you've wandered off into a dark and dangerous place. A real progressive Jew is an affirmative Jew. Someone like, for instance, you had on your show, Tamar, Laura Loomer, who had the courage to stand up for a basic and honest truth, a person who doesn't bow to groupthink or turn on her own people for the sake of publicity and for the sake of sucking up to those that do. So I say to these people, where is your self-awareness, your own cultural pride? And to prove my point, you've sold your soul to the perpetrators of Jew hatred in your country, and that's a shameful act. Give you one example, Tamar. Jews helped Ilhan Omar in her first campaign for Congress. I doubt that many Jews in Minneapolis are going to help her this year. They think they were woke then, but they woke up too late. They put her in Congress in the first place by their lack of self-awareness. And she turned around and bit them in their wallet, or in her words, as she laughs in their face, in their Benjamins. They thought they were part of a woke society. They were really being manipulated by radicals who have hijacked the Democrat Party to insert themselves into the educational system and are now in America, Tamar, teaching their kids to grovel in the shame of white guilt and white privilege. And they're turning kids away from their parents. And it's part of their manifesto, a plan to tear down the family structure as we know it. And it's all there in their manifesto. They spell it out clearly, and it's happening in their schools. But these people, they don't see it. That's how woke they are. They will wake up when the mob comes into their neighborhood, burns down their businesses, and takes up a midnight vigil outside their houses, threatening them and their family. And they're supported by their own democratically elected mayors and governors. And even your Marxist Attorney General, who will arrest you if you resist, like they did to the McCloskeys in St. Louis and many other pieces.
All right, Barry, hold it there. The music's on. We're going to a break. We're going to be right back, everybody. Don't go anywhere.
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
This is Shai Bentakoa, and each week I'll be webcasting to you from Judea, origin of the word Jew, a people besieged and beleaguered in every generation. Nazi Germany's but a memory, but in its place the world invented the phantom Palestinians as this generation's internationally authorized Jew killers. Tune in for a different slant on life in Israel, Phantom Nation, every Monday.
Hi, I'm Rabbi David Aaron. The soul basics are the most profound, the most essential, and yet often the most neglected in our education. Join me for Soul Talk on Israel's News Talk Radio and discover the secrets to love, spiritual growth, and personal power.
How did a nice Jewish girl from Delaware end up living in Israel? Shalom, I'm Natalie Sapinski. Join me on my show, Returning Home. Meet different people who have moved to Israel. Hear their personal stories, their highs, their lows, and everything in between. Each week, we talk to experts on immigration and the process of moving to Israel. Listen to Returning Home every Thursday, only on Israel News Talk Radio.
All right, we're back here at the Tamar, Yonah Show on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. Feel free to call in. We are live if you're listening between 7 to 8 a.m. Holy Time right here in the land of Israel, or if it's between midnight to 1 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time. That means that we are live. We'd love to hear from you. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you have a question? Our guest is Barry Shaw. He's here talking to us about what's going on with the Democratic Party today. It has just taken a turn, a sharp turn left, and we're supposed to pretend with many of these characters taking over the Democratic Party and steering it left. We're supposed to pretend with them that they're mermaids or asexual, or that there's no difference between men and women. There is a difference between men and women. There should be equal opportunity. Yes, absolutely. But we also have to acknowledge there's differences. There are differences between short people and taller people, fat people and skinny people. There's a difference. And that's just facts. But, you know, it's not politically correct to say so. So, Barry, with all of this, where do you think we're headed now?
Well, it's a very disturbing thing because, as I was pointing out before we came to the break, you have a society there in America where people are actually good, law-abiding citizens are living in fear of their lives in a lot of places. And in fact, many are leaving these places. I'll give you a personal example. My daughter next month is leaving Democratic Maryland. She's heading down to Florida. She's had it with things over there. And it's happening because the way that Democrat mayors and governors are governing their states and their cities. They're defunding the police. Who's going to protect the citizens? If this is the way you run your city and your state, how are you going to run a country, for heaven's sake?
Wait, you said that she's in Maryland moving to Florida, or she's in Florida moving to Maryland?
No, she's in Florida is a Republican state, and she's moving down to Florida.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay, that's what I went.
She's very worried when she sees what's happening around her. Mm-hmm. And she's divorced. She's single person, and she wants to get out of there. So she's trying to find a place in Florida.
She should come to Israel.
Democratic cities. This is the way they run cities. This is the way they run states. Very authoritarian. You, as a citizen, have to stay in lockdown. You can't run your business, and yet they'll allow the mobs in the street, and they'll hold the police back and defund them. And it leaves you totally exposed. So you know, where are we? Are you going to vote for what in America? You're going to vote for Biden, sadly in the early stages of dementia. He'll be controlling nothing, not even his own faculties. And he won't even be Kamala Harris. She's a woman who bends physically as well as politically in any direction that advances her own ambition. And a presidential presidency will be run by those who fundamentally want to change America, the Marxists and the anarchists. And I'm not just referring to the violent mobs that are destroying America. I'm referring to their representatives in Congress and the new recruits that are replacing the old Democrat swamp creatures. One example, Ilhan Omar. We know she hates Israel and wants to see us gone. Omar, the speaking, arrogant anti-Semite. Omar, who encouraged the turning of her hometown of Minneapolis into Mogadishu, a place from where she learned to be a Marxist Islamist from her father, the teacher of teachers in the Siad Barre Marxist Islamist Somali dictatorship in Somalia. And she brought a political baggage into the welcoming arms of the Democrat Party. And she now represents what that party has become today. So basically, the radical wing of the party, the ones that the Democrats are going to vote for, have three central tenets. They want to fundamentally change America by eliminating the three Fs: family, faith, and flag. And we saw that at the Democrat convention. I mentioned that before. And yet American Jews who consider themselves progressive are on board with this insanity. They've already ditched their support of Israel, Tamar. Many have abandoned their religious Judaism. They consider it archaic. They think they've gained the moral high ground by transcending all traditional ethics and value of Judaism and are siding with their version of a fairer world. And in my dealings with them, I'm sad to say, I find them tragically, totally blind to what's going on. They're so lost in their Trump derangement syndrome that whenever point out the direction their deranged party is taking, they have no other answer by deflecting, by making character assassination against the president. You know, Tamar, there's a meme going around on social media. You might have seen it. It says, give me a reason to vote Democrat without using the word Trump.
Huh. I did not see that. That's funny.
You not seen that one?
No.
The Democratic Socialists of America controlled the mindset of the Democrat establishment. It's clear to anyone with eyes to see. And
it's funny because there is something going around now where President Trump is saying that he hoped that the Democrats had a good time he hoped that the media had a good time at their convention. He says here, Trump to the press, I hope you had a great weekend at your convention, which I thought was pretty funny. That's to the media. Okay, Barry, I have to ask you this question. It seems almost like it's a cult and that people are just not thinking. I mean, you've got a candidate that is obviously headed towards senility. You have a party that is obviously racist because everything is just reverse racism. You have a party that's against freedom because you can't speak, you can't say the truth. Even if it's your truth and not someone else's, you're not allowed to talk. That's not America. That's not America that we grew up in, where you had freedom of speech. We're seeing all of these opposites and taking place, and yet people, you can't even talk to people today. Why? What's going on?
Biden's always been a Washington swamp creature for half a century. And when I ask Democrat voters to name 3 Biden accomplishments that have enriched and improved the lives of ordinary Americans after 50 years in office, they can't name them. Now, one result of my search I really want to get over here into 8 years of Democrat governance, I found one thing to be startlingly true. Everything they've accused Trump of doing, they've been guilty of it themselves. Russian collusion, we're about to see with the Barr and Durham report how involved they were involved in Russian collusion. Ukraine, we know with Biden shaking down the Ukrainian president, if he didn't back off the prosecutor from going after his son and the corrupt energy company he worked for, perverting the offices of government. So when I hear them say that Trump will do anything to steal an election, Tamar, something in my brain goes bingo. That's what they're plotting to do themselves, steal an election. It's the way they played the game of smoke and mirrors, point in their opponent's direction to distract you from where they're doing themselves. And if you don't think that they would do such a thing, I want to remind you that Obama sent his campaign chief, Jeremy Byrd, to Israel to interfere in our elections by trying to unseat Bibi from power here in Israel in 2015. He recruited U.S. intelligence agencies, the FBI and the Department of Justice, to pervert the course of an election against Trump in 2016. And in the last year and a half, Obama has a national organization organization with a budget of tens of millions of dollars. He spent the last couple of years building this organization called Organizing for Action Network. They have 250 offices nationwide and a staff of 32,000, and the media aren't talking about it, but they should. And I'm convinced that Obama and all the Democrat swamp creatures have coordinated how to harvest votes and steal an election. And that's why they're making an issue about mailing votes, absentee ballots, the post office, because it's a crucial part of their plan. Basically, Trump got elected because the voters saw through Obama and Biden, and they see through a Biden and Harris now. What did Biden ever do in 50 years, as I mentioned? That's why the Democrats have to steal the election, because they know they can't win it legitimately. Trump will win an honest election, and the Democrats know it.
All right, but the Democrats are saying the same thing about the Republicans, that Trump is going to steal the election. They have already got lawyers ready to go in case they lose in order to sue about the elections and contest it. Whatever happens, I just think, and I've said this before in my shows, whoever wins in the United States in November, it's going to be chaos. If the Dems win, it's going to be terrible, in my opinion, because America is not going to be what America is today. And if Trump wins, I think that the Dems are going to go nutso crazy. And I've had a listener write into me very upset that I'm saying this, that I'm being an alarmist, that I'm scaring people. But I am the daughter of a Holocaust survivor. I don't put anything past any evil regimes, and I believe that the Democratic Party has become an evil regime. That's my opinion. You can agree, you can disagree. And you can write me, Tamar at IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. But that's what I see happening. It's going to be very, very bad, whatever happens. You have less than a minute to finish up and leave us with whatever you want. Barry, go ahead.
Well, I have to answer what you said, because I hear it all the time. But at the same time, I think what Trump is saying, quite frankly, let's have an honest election. Let's have debates on the stage so the public can judge between me and my opponent, Biden. Let's have a traditional, legitimate election like America has had every year for centuries. They had it, a verified, open election where people can identify themselves and vote, like we do in any democratic country. It stood the test of time in America. They had it through 2 world wars. It was successful. All this thing about smoke and mirrors of ballots and send off to unnamed people and don't have to identify yourself. You don't have to come with a photographic evidence that you're a citizen of America. What's gone wrong here? Who is making the system corrupt? Have it with the legitimate, like we said before, trust and verify. Verify and trust.
Barry,
and you do that like you do in Israel. You go to a voting booth.
Thank you so much, Barry. And Barry Shaw with us. Thank you. We'll have to keep our eye on it, and we'll talk more about it. Thanks for being with us.
Israel News Talk Radio's chat room. Just click the orange button at the top of the IsraelNewsTalkRadio.home page, log in as yourself or an anonymous guest, and join in on the fun. You'll meet other listeners from all over the world who listen to Israel News Talk Radio, and you can make new friends. Israel News Talk Radio's chat room. It's the closest you can get to being in the studio with us.
We love listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Where can you get the inside news on Israel? At Israel News Talk Radio, we're dedicated to sharing Israel's inside story with the world by providing our listeners with news on Israeli politics, current affairs, and Israeli Jewish culture. The Israel News Talk Radio homepage also provides you, the listener, with useful information at your fingertips, with scrolling news headlines, weather, currency exchange, Shabbat candlelighting times, and so much more. Our radio programming is always accessible and on demand. We operate absolutely free of charge for everyone, everywhere. If you love what we do, partner with us now by becoming an Israel News Talk Radio supporter. With your support, you'll be inscribed on our Israel News Talk Radio Wall of Fame. There's nothing like us in the world. Be part of something great. Israel News Talk Radio. Straight talk from Israel.
If you love Israel News Talk Radio, then you'll love our Facebook page. We keep you up to date on what's happening in Israel, plus little surprise treasures that we don't share on the radio. Go now to follow us on Facebook. Just look for the Israel News Talk Radio Facebook page, and don't forget to subscribe and follow us by clicking on the like button. We post great stuff there that you'll want to share. Israel News Talk Radio on Facebook and Israel News Radio on Twitter.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.